Concetto Spaziale, a concept of space. The title of this work by Lucio Fontana also describes his most constant concern in his paintings and in his sculpture, and above all in the many works like this one that fall somewhere in between these categories. For it is the assumption that painted space is illusory and sculptural space real that Fontana has frequently tried to question. In 1947, he wrote, "Humanity has now developed a new way of thinking, so that it is no longer necessary for the artist to show a person, a house, or something from the natural world. We can develop a feeling for space through the imagination alone." In looking at Fontana's work, we have to let our imagination guide us from detail to detail, as if each were a separate object. Associations emerge. Here, the yellow marks begin to lose their solidity and become signs, representing perhaps the eyebrows and long nose of a face. We see it differently again. The face is perhaps body and head in one. A protruding shape at the left suggests a profile view, and the dark grey shape against the shimmering grey-blue background suggests a figure hurrying past on a rainy night. We want to know more, but only imagination can tell us more. Every time we look, we see something different in the shapes Fontana has created. From what we could call the foreground, our attention spreads to the background, and we notice that it too is made up of separate elements with strange colors and evocative textures. Its sparkling, granular surface invites the touch, but even more, it invites the imagination to give it a further dimension. Distance, depth, a sense of movement, a sense of evolving pattern. Fontana's methods were often as surprising as the works that resulted from them. It's a pointed instrument that Fontana is holding here, not a brush. But the act of piercing the canvas is not an act of aggression. The firm but controlled movement of the hand is quite clear. The holes made by Fontana in his canvas are a means of creation, not destruction. Even where the act of perforation is exaggerated, with paint added around the hole, as if it were part of the piercing process. Some holes suggest natural processes, like a ripe plant pod bursting. Others look more solid than the surrounding area of canvas. But always they prompt the imagination to find more and more in them. Sometimes the sense of depth we feel in these works reaches out towards us, and then beyond us into the space we regard as real. And so the space created by our imagination begins to seem just as real as the space we're standing in. So we see that Fontana's work really demands a new way of looking from us to match the novelty of his methods. Lucio Fontana started using perforations with his work from 1949. The strong sense of regular pattern in the concentric circles encourages us to see the holes first as marks on the surface, almost as if they'd been made with pencil, charcoal, or paint. This is also true of a work from 1950, though here the use of white holes on a dark background makes us more interested in their texture. The long straight lines of holes suggest a mechanical process in their making. And even in this work from 1951, with its curves and circles, the colors are as reminiscent of industry, cement, gravel, concrete, as of nature. The suggestion of the rusted or blistered surface of scrap metal is found again and again. And this is not surprising, because Fontana had been an engineer before becoming a sculptor. His interest in space in his work reflected his fascination with the technology of space travel. "We live in an age of physics and technology," he said. "Painted paper and plaster casts no longer have a right to be here." But this didn't mean that he rejected out of hand the art of past ages. In fact, quite the contrary. He often looked back to earlier examples of sculpture, and in particular to works from the Baroque period. And once again, it was his interest in space that motivated him. And we should bear in mind that, for all his deliberate innovations, Fontana retained the traditional rectangular format in works like this. It's partly for this reason that his major departures from tradition are so remarkable, and sometimes even shocking. In the late 50s, he shocked quite a number of people with a series of works that made the perforated surfaces of 10 years earlier look decorative and almost tame. Now he started making long slashes in the canvas. The lines were cut with a firm stroke and carefully placed to run parallel to each other. There is little sense of the arbitrary and no sense at all of marks formed by any natural process. From this point on, Fontana's works were much more direct statements, uncompromising, forceful, one might well say brutal in their expression. Compared with the intriguing, often beautiful surfaces of the perforated works, his canvases now were defiantly flat, painted with one bold color. This emphasized all the more the disruption introduced by the cut. But it held in check the sense of assault, as the surface did not now seem organic. There is nonetheless a disturbing tension in these works, but this is mostly to do with the concept behind them. For Fontana's knife is cutting into something more than a piece of colored canvas. It is denying almost all the assumptions we habitually bring to a painted surface. He tells us that the principal meaning of the work is not in the painted surface itself, but in the cut, or rather in that mysterious dimension beyond the picture to which the cut, both literally and symbolically, directs us. The essentially contemplative approach that stands behind the action of piercing or cutting the canvas is more evident in works such as this, from 1961, where stones are arranged in circles. The pattern and the materials used to make it recall the ceremonial and ritual designs of primitive peoples. The sparkle of these stones sets off our imagination, just like the colors and textures in the earlier works. And looking again at our first picture, both at the startling colors like this acid yellow and at the oddly appealing textures Fontana uses, we can see that there's a very strong urge to explore strange new territory. It's as if Fontana is using all the means available to the artist to explore the universe that preoccupied physicists and astronauts. In this respect, Fontana seems very much an artist of his time. But his concept of space and of time and movement was very sophisticated, and he was able to see how certain modern scientific notions about space could relate to, say, artistic concepts guiding the sculptors of the Baroque period. And his deep interest in space exploration did lead him to produce images very similar to those sent back by manned and unmanned rockets launched during the 1960s. The philosophical values such images now hold for us were perhaps sensed by Fontana from the start, in part perhaps because he found such photographs corresponded with images in his own imagination, which he had recorded in works such as this. And this seemed altogether natural to him. The cosmos of the work of art ought, after all, to reflect the larger cosmos of divine creation. And if we find elements of ugliness, comedy, or brutality in Fontana's work, that too should not surprise us. What counts is the sum of the parts, and beyond this, the further dimension to which the artist directs our attention. Fontana has spoken of the philosophy of nothingness behind his work. By this he means the positive void charged with the energy on which the artist draws, but which he can never exhaust.